He found the wagon at first light, halfway up the lane that led to Whitfield Ranch, stopped dead in the mud where the wheel had finally given out. A woman sat on the bench, soaked through from the night's rain, with a boy of about 11 asleep against her shoulder and an infant wrapped tight against her chest. She wasn't crying, she wasn't asking for anything. She was simply waiting, the way people wait when they've run out of other choices, and pride is the only thing left holding them upright. Caleb Whitfield stood at the edge of his land with his hat dripping and felt something shift in his chest that he hadn't given permission to move. He'd posted the notice himself 3 weeks back, nailed to the post outside the feed store in Larkspur Hollow, Montana. Cook wanted, Whitfield Ranch, fair wages, asked for Caleb. He hadn't expected the answers he got. A widow who talked more she cooked. A young woman whose father clearly wanted her married off to whoever owned the most land. A man in a city suit who asked about staff quarters before he asked about the stove. Caleb had turned every one of them away and gone back to eating burnt beans alone at his own table, telling himself it didn't matter, that a man could live on burnt beans if he had to. He hadn't expected a wagon stuck in his mud at sunrise with a family inside it. "Morning," he said, walking closer. The woman lifted her head. Her eyes were the kind of tired that didn't come from one bad night. It came from a year of them stacked end to end. "Good morning, sir," she said. "I'm sorry about the wheel. I'll have it moved as soon as—" "Wheel's the least of it," Caleb said, looking at the mud caking her skirt, the boy shivering even in sleep, the baby's blanket gone half soaked through. "You been out here all night?" "We got caught in the storm," she said, like that explained everything and nothing. "I didn't want to wake anyone at this hour." "It's already this hour." He reached up and helped her down before she could refuse, which she looked like she might. "Come inside. Fire's still got coals in it." She hesitated, the way a person hesitates when kindness has burned them before. Then she nodded, gathered the baby tighter, and gently shook the boy awake. "Tom," she said softly, "we're here." The boy's eyes opened, found Caleb, and went hard and watchful in the space of a single breath, the look of a child who'd learned that strangers were a risk to be measured before they were trusted. "Hannah Ross," the woman said, once they were inside, settling the baby onto a folded blanket near the hearth. "This is Tom, and this is Lily." "Caleb Whitfield." I stoked the fire back to life. "You're here about the notice." "I am." She straightened, even soaked and exhausted, like the words cost her dearly and she intended to spend them carefully. "I can cook. I can keep a house running. I work hard, Mr. Whitfield, and I won't cause you a trouble." "Where's your husband, Mrs. Ross?" Her hand stilled over the baby's blanket for just a moment. "He passed 8 months ago. Fever. We've been making our way since, looking for somewhere that would take the 3 of us and not just me." Caleb looked at the boy, sitting rigid on the bench with his chin up, daring the world to find a reason to send him away again. He looked at the baby, barely past her first year, sleeping like she'd learned early that crying didn't fix anything. And he looked at Hannah, who hadn't once asked for pity, only for work. "I haven't said you have the position," he said. "No," she agreed, "but the stove's warm now. Let me make you breakfast while we discuss it." She was at the stove before he could argue, moving through his kitchen like she'd lived there her whole life, finding the flour, the lard, the eggs he'd forgotten he had, without asking where anything was kept. Tom watched her the way a boy watches his mother when he's seen her do this in 100 different kitchens that weren't theirs to keep. By the time the biscuits came out of the oven, golden and rising the way Caleb's never had, he'd already decided. He just hadn't told her yet. "You'll have the room off the kitchen, you and the children. Wages every Friday. No one in town will trouble you out here. It's a far walk in, and the cattle don't gossip." Something in Hannah's shoulders dropped, the particular release of a person who had been braced for refusal and hadn't believed even now that the answer might be yes. "Thank you," she said, and her voice cracked on the second word in a way her whole posture hadn't all night. The weeks that followed filled the ranch with sounds it hadn't known in years. Lily's laughter when Tom spun her around the porch, the smell of fresh bread rising before dawn. Hannah,
humming low while she worked, not for anyone's benefit, just because the house had room in it now for humming. Caleb found himself coming in earlier from the fields, finding reasons to linger near the kitchen, telling himself it was the coffee, and knowing, somewhere under that, it wasn't. Tom warmed slowly, the way burned children always do, first helping with chores without being asked, then trailing Caleb out to the barn just to watch him work, then one evening asking, quiet and almost ashamed of the question, if Caleb might teach him to ride properly. "Your pa never teach you?" Caleb asked. "He was sick a long time before he died," Tom said, eyes on his boots. There wasn't much time left over for things like that. Caleb didn't say anything for a moment. Then he handed the boy a length of rope. "Tomorrow morning, before chores, we'll start with the basics." It became a routine neither of them named out loud. An hour before sunrise, just the two of them and the horses. Caleb's patience steady as stone, Tom's confidence growing one small success at a time. Hannah watched it from the kitchen window some mornings, a cup of coffee going cold in her hands, and didn't try to explain to herself why it made her throat tighten. But Larkspur Hollow was a small town, and small towns notice things long before they understand them. It was Edith Marsh who ran the dry goods store and considered herself the moral compass of the county, who said it first, loud enough for half the church social to hear. "A widow living alone with a bachelor rancher under his roof, no family to chaperone? What exactly are we meant to think that looks like?" Hannah heard about it before the day was through, the way such things always traveled faster than truth could catch them. She said nothing to Caleb about it for 3 days, going through her chores, work with the same steady confidence as always, but something in her had gone quieter, more careful, like a woman bracing for the ground to shift again. Caleb noticed. He always noticed, even when he didn't say much about it. "Something's troubling you," he said one evening, finding her on the porch after the children were asleep. "It's nothing." "Hannah." He said her name plainly, without pressure, the way he said most things. "You've been somewhere else all week." So she told him about Edith Marsh, about the looks at the general store, about the particular kind of judgment reserved for women who had nothing and dared to accept help from a man who wasn't their husband. "I don't want to be the reason there's talk about your name," she said. "You've been nothing but decent to us. I won't let that cost you your standing in this town." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the dark fields. "Let me ask you something," he said finally. "In all the months you've been here, have I ever given you reason to think I wanted anything from you that you didn't offer freely?" "No," she said immediately, "never." "Then the talk isn't about anything real. It's about people who've got too much time and not enough kindness filling the space with something easier to chew on." He turned to look at her. "I'm not going to let a woman like Edith Marsh decide who belongs at my table." "It's not just your table they're talking about," Hannah said quietly. "It's your reputation, your standing with the other ranchers, the bank if you ever need a loan again." "Hannah," he said it again, softer this time. "I've been thinking about something for a while now, and I expect now's as good a time as any to say it plain, instead of letting a woman like Edith Marsh force my hand before I'm ready." He took a breath like a man stepping off solid ground on purpose. "I don't want you under my roof as my cook anymore. I want you under it as my wife, if you'll have me. Not because of the talk, in spite of it. I've wanted to ask you for longer than I've let myself admit." Hannah stared at him, the porch lantern throwing soft light across a face that had gone very still. "Caleb, I have 2 children. I have nothing to bring you. No land, no money. You brought a kitchen back to life that had gone cold for 3 years. You brought a boy who's learning to sit a horse like he was born to it, and a baby girl who reaches for me now when I walk in the door, and a kind of quiet in this house I didn't know I was missing until you filled it. I'm not asking what you can bring, Hannah. I'm asking if you'll stay." She didn't answer right away. She looked at him for a long time, the way a person looks at something they've wanted badly enough that they've stopped letting themselves want it out loud. "Yes," she said finally, and her voice broke clean in half on the word. "Yes, Caleb, I'll stay." They married 11 days later, in the front room of the ranch house, with the reverend from the next county over and exactly 6 guests, because Caleb said he didn't need a crowd to know what he was certain of. Tom stood beside Caleb the whole ceremony, straight-backed and solemn, like he understood he was being given something he hadn't dared hope for either. Not just a mother who was safe, but a man who'd shown him morning after morning before sunrise what steady looked like. Edith Marsh did not attend and made her opinion known regardless. It did not change anything that mattered.
What changed, slowly, the way things change in small towns, not with announcements, but with small moments accumulating, was the town's understanding of who Hannah Ross, now Hannah Whitfield, actually was. The school teacher took a liking to Tom's quick mind and moved him up a reading group within his first month. The blacksmith's wife, after months of polite distance, found herself genuinely laughing with Hannah over a recipe exchange and forgot to keep her guard up afterward. Even Edith Marsh, eventually, softened by nothing more dramatic than time and the plain evidence that nothing scandalous had ever been true, started nodding to Hannah in the street instead of looking away. Caleb never made a single speech about loyalty or decency. He simply came in for supper every evening, said what he meant, fixed what needed fixing, and never once made Hannah feel like she owed him for the roof over her head. It was nothing extraordinary, it was just steady. And steady, Hannah had learned the hard way, was rarer and worth more than anything dazzling. One evening in late autumn, with the first real cold settling over the Montana plains, Hannah stood on the porch after the children had gone to bed, watching the land that now bore her name on the deed alongside Caleb's. She thought of the woman who had sat in a broken wagon at the edge of this property with nothing left to spare, and how she hadn't known then that nothing left to spare wasn't the same as nothing left at all. Caleb came out and stood beside her, quiet in the way that had become its own kind of comfort rather than its own kind of distance. "Cold's coming," he said. "Yes." "You all right?" She considered the question the way she'd come to consider all of his, as something genuinely asked, not just filling silence. "I'm more than all right," she said. "I don't think I have a word big enough for what I am." "You don't need one," Caleb said.
Inside, Tom's voice rose, half laughing, telling Lily to give back whatever she'd taken from him, and Lily's small voice answered back without an ounce of guilt. Hannah laughed, the full, unguarded kind she'd nearly forgotten she still had in her, and it carried out over the dark fields, the same fields that had once held nothing for her but a broken wheel and a long, uncertain night. She had arrived at that gate with nothing. She left it, in every way that mattered, having found everything. Some people break, and that's where their story ends. And some people break, and what grows back in the broken places is stronger than anything that was there before. Not because of luck, but because of every hard mile walked, every promise kept, and every single morning they chose to get back up anyway. That is the quiet lesson this story leaves behind.
Real worth is never measured by what a person arrives with, but by what they're willing to keep giving even when they have almost nothing left. And true kindness asks nothing in return except the chance to be seen for who you really are.